This is update for December 13, 2022, day 293 of the war, end of the date update. So gonna start with the general strategic topics, and then we're gonna switch to Ukrainian, battleground situation on the battleground in. Now let me introduce our sponsor, David Autere, who wrote 2 books attempting to answer the following questions: how we ended up with a war in Ukraine and possibly war in Taiwan, why Russia and China are so aggressive, and how they can divide NATO and EU from within. The first book, The Fure of the Tsar, Bonfire, written in 2019, and the sequel, Vicious Circle, written in 2021, but they read like they were written today. The Fury of the Tsar is about Putin's mindset, what he wants and why, while Vicious Circle shows how Russia and China prepare for the war and cooperate while being highly distrustful of each other. Do I agree with all assessments in these 2 books? No, not at all. But there is immense amount of information in the books, and they have an interesting perspective. Are the Russians and Chinese truly allies? Can they cooperate and take on the West? Can Russia manipulate national tensions between European countries? Both books available on Amazon and now on Christmas sales. Price is reduced to €2 for all of the December. So hurry up. Links are in the description. Ukraine. So first of all, let's start with Russia. Just kind of a little bit more details to what's going on there with the economy. So there was a report that import-driven taxes, which means basically VAT and import duties, fell by 22% for 11 months of this year, meaning January through November 2022 relative to 2021. So basically year on year. I mentioned this before. This is sort of call it normal, expected, because import into Russia has dropped significantly. So that's just kind of like natural sort of consequence of that because of all of the import restrictions put out by West. Then real estate transactions in Russia fell. This is official number. I think Russian Statistical Bureau or something like that, like basically official government entity, reported that real estate transaction fell by 21% year on year again, and it's all again 11 months of this year. Then a little bit more sort of color. So Russian ruble continues its slide. Went down to 60, already at 63 Russian rubles per US dollar. For those who didn't pay attention, it was used to be like under 60, it was like 58 or something like that. This is, again, the currency is a reflection of the cumulative reflection or holistic reflection of the situation in the economy and in the financial system. So that's another proof that financial systems start to deteriorate, even though this exchange rate sort of in many ways artificial. Nevertheless, even that artificial rate is kind of going in the wrong, is going in the wrong direction for Russia. Then let's switch a little bit to China. One interesting news is that China wants to use its Shanghai Commodity Exchange as a trading hub for natural gas and crude oil, and the transactions are going to be in Chinese yuan, which also means that this is another sort of piece of the puzzle that we've seen what's going on in Persian Gulf, where most those countries are basically buying into Chinese technology, signing agreements to sell their natural gas and crude oil to China. And essentially now there is now there is a vehicle to do those transactions, right? So which is a very efficient and right move for China. And this is going to be competition to basically US commodity exchanges. So again, this is another, well, I would say, pretty significant step in building sort of parallel system, and attempting to sort of undermine the power of US, and specifically more aimed at US dollar, basically, right? So at the same time, I would say that it's not gonna undermine the power of US dollar the way it's being hoped for by China, simply because China doesn't have a currency in many ways. It just government sort of controlled paper notes. It's not truly currency. So it's a medium of exchange, maybe at best, but it's not truly money, because you cannot trust communist regime with your capital. So it never will be able to truly compete or replace, but it's maybe creating a little bit more sort of parallel system. So, for example, US and Europe, in case of euros, cannot track transactions and what's happening there, because as long as, say, you transact in euros or US dollars or whatever other currency, you can be easily tracked by the government that issues the currency. So, and in case of, let's say, invasion of Taiwan, it also the financial part of the transactions will not be disrupted, right? Because it's going to be in yuan. US cannot do much about that. So this is actually another sort of probably step in preparation for future invasion or potential invasion, in case things don't go well in terms of the elections in Taiwan in 2024. Then there is another sort of use of sort of show of power was today by China. I think 29 Chinese airplanes, including 18 strategic bombers. I think they're like equivalent of like Soviet 295 or 222, and then I think US equivalent is B1. So basically, they flew into Taiwanese airspace, just to show typical show, right? So that we will see we have seen, and we will see more of those. Then also Chinese government announces that they're going to invest 143 billion in the chip making facilities, chip making capabilities in the country. While the money is not the problem, that's very clear. The really problem is actually talent that can do that, and equipment and all of that. So, and that's where the problems are. That in many ways this announcement may sound like something sort of like a credible threat, but in reality, very little will be realized out of this, with exception, obviously, that there will be expansion of this 12 nanometer production facilities, which is, let's say, less advanced technology. It's still pretty advanced, but it's not comparable to 5 and 3 nanometers, and potentially 2 in probably 2024. I think there will be 2 nanometer. So again, China tries to make its own steps to counter US sanctions. In terms of whether they're going to be effective, there is a very, very big question on that. Now let's actually switch to Ukraine a little bit. So I just want to give you a little update, just sort of interesting development. So Ukrainian military decided to use this Tu-141, which is basically reconnaissance airplane created in Soviet Union and produced from like mid 70s till 89. And so Ukraine had a bunch of those, and they being basically converted into the cruise missiles. The speed of this, I would say it's a really hybrid between the rocket and airplane, is 1,000 kilometers per hour. and the ceiling is about 6,000 meters. So as you can see, and the distance range is 1,000 kilometers. So as you can see, this sort of circle shows you that the capabilities to hit is probably pretty significant right now. So what happened is there was this is going to be this used to be a reconnaissance piece of equipment. All of that reconnaissance equipment, basically all fashioned cameras, were removed, and explosives were loaded. It's fairly small amount of explosive, only up to 100 kilograms. It's definitely not equivalent of the Russian missiles, which has like 480 kilograms of explosive, but nevertheless, they can inflict painful damage. And then there's also the control unit was replaced and so on. So that's why you've seen those attacks in Saratov here. Those Russian strategic bombers, I think a couple of them were damaged there. So that's how it was essentially done. Then in other news out of Ukrainian government announced that they finally started production of 122 and 152 millimeter shells, which I would say I'm very skeptical. It usually means some kind of, let's say usually, some kind of machination there, and they announced that it's a number in thousands. If for those just to give you perspective, there's a new report was that Russian military is spending about 20,000 shells per day right now. During the sort of more intense fighting in the summer, they were spending up to like 40,000 shells, 152 millimeter, just those per day. Ukrainian side would be spending about 12,000 during those intense times. Now they're spending a lot less because there is basically shell hunger on the Ukrainian side, permanent one, and that prevent. Well, I would say it does not really prevent if you use it. If you have, because usually the way it's presented in Ukraine and generally is okay. Well, that's a big problem because we cannot, shoot the same number of shells. The reality of it, you don't really need to shoot the same number of shells as Russian army does, not even close, because Russian army is relying on this basically carpet shelling, sort of World War One and World War II style, versus Ukraine has a lot of precise cannons that can use precise ammunition. That's extremely precise, plus minus 2 meters. So you really don't need to spend the same number of shells. The problem in Ukrainian artillery, as a branch of military, is that there is still no UAVs similar to our Lan-10 that could be capable of doing similar job, and there is no structural changes in terms of organizationally that those UAVs are embedded into the artillery units. They some of them have like volunteers help and all that, but it's not sort of like systemic, right? So that's where the problem is, and more importantly, that there is systemic problem at the level of military commanders that don't understand that, and so they use artillery in sort of, again, World War One, World War II style, and as I said before, Ukraine cannot match Russia by any means because simply country is 3.5 times smaller, and in terms of resources, it's even more than that. So basically because they are in many ways incapable and incompetent, they try basically, what happens is they go to the West and say, well, supply is the same amount Russia has, and Ukraine will never get the same amount of, let's say, shells that Russia has, or the number of artillery pieces. So again, this goes back to what I said many times before. It's attempt to fight Soviet style against larger Soviet army, and the sort of the future is very clear. There's no chance of success that way for Ukraine. This is a war of attrition. This is becoming more and more clear with every passing day, and a window of opportunity actually for Ukraine to win is closing with every passing day, because wasteful expenditure of resources basically will prevent Ukraine from being, let's say that there's a change of strategy down the road to really efficient and effective, and sort of fighting using quality, not quantity. At that point, all of resources might be expended to that level that even the change of the strategy will not help at all, because it's too late. So that point of no return is approaching for Ukraine, and pretty fast. And that's another problem why this leadership kind of like in many ways leads Ukraine towards some kind of disaster with this strategy. Well, but and to be really sort of even more direct, there is really no strategy. That's really the problem on the Ukrainian side. It's just reactive, sort of knee-jerk reaction. Essentially, that's what's really happening, and so that's the situation on this topic. And then there's also some so there is news on CNN saying that Ukraine is about to receive Patriot missile defensive missile systems, and it looks like it's actually a pretty real possibility, because turns out that that there were a bunch of Ukrainian troops who were trained in Germany to operate Patriot missiles, and that that batch is finishing its education end of December, basically in probably a week or so, or maybe almost there. And so that makes puzzles kind of comes together, and it makes sense that Ukraine probably will get it. It might be too late in terms of infrastructure, because it's totally crippled, and basically in coma. But it may prevent future sort of complete sort of disintegration of the power grid of Ukraine. That's the only sort of difference that at this point this can provide. Also, there is a question about the quantity. It might be also therapeutic quantity that only kind of allows you, let's say, to protect couple locations, and that's it, which again does not solve the problem. But at the same time, it's still good development. Definitely sort of helps Ukraine to defend itself. Related to this, Ukrainian president was asking for basically money to buy electricity in the West. So what happens now? Ukraine has actually started buying electricity in the West, which also kind of creates even more problems, more stress on the European electricity system, which, if you listen, that there is structural problem as a result of failed energy policies in the European Union. So that Ukraine basically becoming another sort of beggar in that system, and then again, this is all result of eternal mistakes by Ukrainian leadership that never sort of cared about investing in defense of the country. So that's it in terms of general news for now. Now let's actually switch to the battlefield. We're gonna do it in a clockwise fashion, starting from very north and then going down south and then west. So the situation along the state border is more or less stable, with the exception Ukrainian military attacked Russian military base in Clean Sea. This is this Bryansk region straight up north here where I'm showing. So that attack looked to be partially successful. Now let's switch to North Lugansk front line. Things here are sort of definitely moving into the Russians' favor. Russia is slowly seizing initiative here, and Ukrainian troops are clearly at this point on defensive in this area. So, but however, there's no changes in the sort of front line. Territory-wise, everything remains the same here. Let's move to North Donbass front line, where things are sort of somewhat in a crisis mode for Ukrainian side. So as you can see, then again, Wagner mercenaries attacking in sort of typical way. There are reports that Wagner mercenaries managed to advance in Bahmut. Those advances are not sort of huge, but they are sort of typical way where there's nothing and then suddenly things sort of fall apart and they move a little bit closer. I'm referring to Wagner mercenaries to their goal. So in this case, they basically managed to capture two industrial plants on the eastern side of Bahmut, basically north of this main road that kind of goes east to west here, so a little bit north, straight up north, and then they're approaching basically to city outskirts, town outskirts, from this call it like east southeast direction. So they got the defensive line literally goes along on the outskirts of the town at this point here, and here they managed to sort of penetrate a little bit more into industrial zone. So definitely not a positive development for Ukrainian side. At the same time, this is the least sort of dangerous development you can have here, because all of this sort of salients that we see here, they are much more dangerous in their nature than frontal attack from the eastern side on Bahmut. Then those Wagner mercenaries continued their attempts to move sort of in this northwestern direction here, essentially get closer to Ivanivska and potentially capture Klishchiivka. Now let's move south. Let's look at central Donbass front line. Things here are more or less similar, no essential changes here. The only development in Maryinka that seems to be concerning is that Russian troops have approached, or actually even maybe cut off, basically one of the roads that goes from Maryinka in their northern direction, or I would say more like northeastern direction, to the neighboring town called Krasnogorivka. So basically one road, but it's not the main road, but still the development is like one of the passes got cut off. So that's definitely not a positive development here. Then there's attack in Novomikhailivka that didn't go anywhere. And Maryinka here is essentially also no essential changes, with the exception that this road is either under direct fire control or actually physically controlled by the Russian troops. But again, no collapse or anything like that here. Now let's quickly check the Zaporizhya front line. And here is actually, there's, I wouldn't say it's interesting, but some informative development. So it looks like Ukrainian military attacked bridge here in Melitopol. It's unfortunately covered here, but it's this town is here. So that's probably the largest town in Zaporizhya. Well, not probably, it is largest one actually in general in this sort of southern region of Ukraine that's controlled by Russian side, with exception of Mariupol. But Mariupol is essentially, destroyed, versus this one is essentially in perfect condition. This town. So this basically it's a hub, railroad hub, and just general roads, typical road hub that sort of connects uh, um, Crimea with the rest, right? So there is one road that goes up north to Russia. Then there is kind of like along the, not along that, but basically kind of like the road that goes through Melitopol, and goes to basically Rostov, essentially. So that's another sort of backup supply route for the Russian sort of troops, and generally for the Russians to supply um, Crimea, and especially since the Crimean bridge is severely damaged, essentially not usable right now, and even though it's being repaired, but it doesn't look like the repairs are basically done to, that it's being fixed to the to allow transportation of military equipment, everything through the railroad. But then the point is that Ukrainian military attacked the railroad bridge across the Molochna River there in Melitopol, which gonna impair Russian logistics here in this area. So this may mean that that Ukrainian command decided to pursue some offensive goals in Zaporizhia region. So basically, it's kind of like a preparation for potential future attack by basically disrupting rear logistics and ability to resupply the troops. That's definitely far from being sort of finished. This is just the initial step here. So again, this is somewhat speculative, but we may see interesting situation sometime in January, February, where Ukrainian side may try to attack here, and basically the whole idea is to repeat the same idea of what I mentioned before, and in which is obvious to everyone, and others repeated this, is basically attack towards, straight towards Azov Sea, and essentially cut off Crimea and all of this group of Russian troops here. That's very straightforward. It's a very obvious idea. So this may happen in that January-February timeframe, versus Russian troops are preparing for major attack, apparently sort of more up north, either here, the central Donetsk front line, or maybe north, or North Lugansk. Where it's going to happen is totally unclear at this point, but it's very clear that they're accumulating resources to launch that offensive. So we may see interesting developments sometime early next year. Otherwise, this Zaporizhia front line is basically quiet, with the exception of this area that's sort of kind of like crossover Velika Novostilka, where the Russian troops tried to attack, but that attack died off essentially. It didn't go anywhere at this point. Everything's sort of stable here. That's it for today. Thanks for watching, and until tomorrow. Bye bye.